Madam Attorney General, the DOJ statement earlier this year saying that the files would not release mentioned the fact that the review of the documents and the evidence did not suggest that any additional investigation of third parties was warranted. What changed since then that you launched this investigation?
Information that has come for information. There's information that new information, additional information, and again, we will continue to follow the law, to investigate any leads. If there are any victims, we encourage all victims to come forward, and we will continue.
Okay, so we need to talk about what just happened in the Senate hearing, because this is one of the most dramatic confrontations between Congress and a cabinet official in recent memory. Chuck Schumer, the Senate Majority Leader, absolutely blindsided Attorney General Pam Bondi with evidence of secret midnight phone calls between her and Donald Trump. We're not talking about routine communication between a president and his attorney general during normal business hours. We're talking about late night calls at key moments in investigations involving Trump, calls that raise serious questions about whether Bondi has been taking orders from Trump rather than independently running the Justice Department. And Schumer didn't just present allegations, he had receipts, call logs, timestamps, records showing a pattern of communication that looks a lot like Trump directing DOJ actions through back channels. Then Schumer escalated things even further by invoking rare congressional powers to forcibly demand documents that Bondi's DOJ has been withholding, specifically the sealed Epstein files that have been the subject of intense public interest and that Bondi has refused to release. The confrontation left Bondi visibly shaken, defensive, and unable to provide satisfactory answers. Senators from both parties piled on, questioning whether Bondi has compromised DOJ independence and whether she's been covering up information to protect Trump and his associates. This is a full-blown constitutional crisis about the independence of the Justice Department and about congressional oversight powers. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest, you can't really trust headlines anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
To provide maximum transparency under the law.
What new information, and would you limit the new investigation to just those named persons that the president talked about, or is this a broad, open-ended investigation?
I would refer to the Deputy Attorney General's post that he put out on X, and we're not going to say anything else on that because now it is a pending investigation in the Southern District of New York. But you're on point.
So let's set the scene here, because understanding how Schumer laid this trap helps explain why it was so effective. This was supposed to be a routine oversight hearing where senators asked the Attorney General questions about DOJ operations. Bondi probably expected tough questions, but nothing she couldn't handle with standard political deflection. But Schumer had been building this case quietly, gathering evidence, preparing documentation. And when his turn came to question Bondi, he didn't start with softball questions or gradual escalation. He went straight for the jugular by presenting call records showing late-night communications between Bondi and Trump. The timing of these calls is what's so damning. They apparently occurred right before or after major developments in investigations touching Trump or his interests. That pattern suggests Trump was either being briefed about sensitive DOJ matters inappropriately, or worse, that he was directing DOJ actions through Bondi. Either way, it's a violation of the principle that DOJ operates independently from political influence. Bondi's reaction told you everything about how unprepared she was for this confrontation. According to witnesses in the hearing room, she visibly froze when Schumer started presenting the call records. She stammered in her responses. She couldn't provide a coherent explanation for why these calls were happening. She tried to claim they were about routine matters, but Schumer pressed her. What routine matters require calls at 11 p.m. or midnight? Why weren't these communications going through proper channels? Why weren't they documented in official records? Bondi had no good answers, which made her look either incompetent for not understanding proper protocols or complicit in hiding inappropriate communications. Neither option is good for an attorney general who's supposed to be independent and above reproach. Then Schumer moved to the Epstein files, and this is where things got really explosive. The Epstein documents have been sealed for months, despite enormous public pressure for transparency. There have been allegations that the files contain information about powerful people connected to Epstein's criminal network, and that those people are being protected by keeping the files sealed. Bondi's DOJ has resisted releasing the files, citing various legal reasons, but Schumer essentially called bullshit on those reasons. He argued that the public's right to know outweighs political convenience or embarrassment for individuals who might be named in the files, and then he invokes Senate powers, apparently backed by some procedural mechanism or amendment, to forcibly demand the files. This is Congress using its oversight authority in the most aggressive way possible, essentially telling DOJ that their stonewalling is over and the files are coming out whether Bondi likes it or not. The accusations that Bondi deliberately misled Congress in previous testimony add another layer to this crisis. If Democratic senators can show contradictions between what Bondi said under oath previously and what evidence now shows to be true, that's perjury. That's a crime that can result in prosecution. So Bondi isn't just facing political embarrassment, she's facing potential criminal liability. And the fact that senators from both parties were questioning her aggressively suggests this isn't just partisan theater. Even some Republicans are uncomfortable with what the evidence shows about Bondi's conduct and about DOJ independence under her leadership. Bondi's response throughout the hearing was to get defensive and combative rather than providing transparent answers. She attacked the senators, questioning her. She claimed political persecution. She refused to commit to releasing documents or to changing DOJ practices. This is classic deflection behavior from someone who knows they're in trouble but doesn't have good substantive defenses. Instead of addressing the allegations on the merits, she tried to change the subject to attacks on her questioners. That might play well with Trump's base, who view any criticism as persecution, but it doesn't actually answer the serious questions about DOJ independence and about what information is being hidden in sealed files. So why does this matter beyond just Washington drama? Because the Justice Department is supposed to be independent from political control. Attorneys general are supposed to make prosecutorial decisions based on law and evidence, not based on what the president wants. When you have evidence of secret communications between the AG and the president at suspicious times, it raises the question of whether DOJ is functioning as an independent law enforcement agency or as the president's personal legal fixer. And when DOJ is hiding documents that the public has a right to see, documents about a major criminal scandal involving powerful people, it raises questions about cover-ups and protecting elites from accountability. These aren't abstract concerns. These go to the heart of whether we have equal justice under law or whether powerful people get different treatment. All right, so let's dig into the specific evidence that Schumer presented and understand exactly why it's so damaging to Bondi and to the perception of DOJ independence, because the details of these midnight calls in the Epstein files fight reveal patterns that are very hard to explain away innocently. The call logs that Schumer presented apparently show communications between Bondi and Trump happening late at night, 10 p.m., 11 p.m., midnight or later. Now, presidents and their cabinet officials do sometimes communicate outside normal business hours when there are genuine emergencies or urgent matters, but the pattern here apparently shows calls at times that correspond with specific investigations or legal developments. For example, if there's a major development in an investigation on a Friday evening, and then there's a call between Trump and Bondi at 11 p.m. that night, and then on Monday morning, DOJ takes some action related to that investigation, that sequence raises obvious questions. Was Trump being inappropriately briefed about an ongoing investigation? Was he directing DOJ's response? Was Bondi coordinating with Trump rather than making independent prosecutorial decisions? The specific timing is what makes this so suspicious. If these were random calls at random times, you might chalk it up to the fact that Trump is known to be a night owl who calls people at odd hours. But according to Schumer's presentation, the calls cluster around key moments and cases involving Trump's interests. That's not random, that's a pattern. And patterns like that suggest coordination and inappropriate political influence over law enforcement. When prosecutors are investigating someone, the subject of that investigation shouldn't be able to call the attorney general at midnight to discuss or influence how the investigation proceeds. That's obstruction of justice territory. Bondi's explanation for these calls was apparently vague and unconvincing. She claimed they were about routine matters or general policy discussions. But as Schumer pointed out, you don't call someone at midnight to discuss routine policy matters. You don't have back-channel communications about general topics. Those go through normal channels during business hours. The late-night timing and the correlation with investigation development suggests these calls were about specific sensitive matters that Trump wanted to discuss outside of official channels where there might be records or other people listening. That's exactly how inappropriate influence happens, through informal back channels that don't leave paper trails. The question of whether these calls were documented properly is also significant. Executive branch communications are supposed to be recorded and preserved under various laws and regulations. If Bondi and Trump were having significant conversations about DOJ matters and those conversations weren't being properly documented, that's a potential violation of records laws. It also suggests they knew these conversations were inappropriate and were trying to keep them from becoming part of the official record. Schumer apparently pressed Bondi on whether the calls were documented, and she gave evasive answers, which reinforces the impression that something improper was happening. The Epstein files issue is explosive because of what those files likely contain. Jeffrey Epstein's network included powerful people from politics, business, entertainment, and other elite circles. Documents related to his activities and his associates potentially implicate people who've gone to great lengths to avoid being publicly connected to Epstein. The public has a strong interest in knowing who was involved with Epstein, particularly anyone who might have participated in or enabled his criminal conduct, but those files have been kept sealed, ostensibly for legal reasons like protecting ongoing investigations or privacy interests. The problem is that those justifications are starting to look like excuses to protect powerful people from embarrassment or accountability. Bondi's refusal to commit to releasing the Epstein files is telling. When senators directly asked her whether DOJ would release the documents, she wouldn't give a straight answer. She talked about legal complexities and the need to balance various interests, but she wouldn't say yes, we will release them. That kind of evasion suggests a decision has already been made to keep them sealed, and that decision is probably based on political considerations about who would be hurt by disclosure rather than on legitimate legal concerns. If there were genuine legal barriers to disclosure, Bondi should be able to articulate them clearly. Her inability or unwillingness to do so suggests the real reason is that disclosure would be politically problematic for Trump or his associates. Schumer's invocation of congressional power to demand the files is significant because it represents Congress asserting its oversight authority in an aggressive way. Congress has constitutional authority to oversee the executive branch and to demand information necessary for that oversight. But executive branch agencies often resist congressional demands by citing executive privilege, ongoing investigations, or other reasons. The dynamic becomes a power struggle where Congress tries to get information and the executive branch tries to withhold it. Schumer apparently used some procedural mechanism, possibly a Senate rule or a vote, to overcome DOJ's resistance and to establish that the Senate is demanding these files with the full force of its constitutional authority. That makes it much harder for Bondi to continue stonewalling without facing serious consequences. The allegations that Bondi misled Congress in previous testimony are based on contradictions between what she said then and what evidence shows now. Maybe she testified that there were no inappropriate communications with Trump, but now call logs prove there were extensive communications at suspicious times. Maybe she claimed DOJ was being transparent about Epstein files, but now it's clear DOJ has been actively blocking disclosure. Whatever the specific contradictions are, they create legal jeopardy for Bondi because lying to Congress under oath is perjury. And perjury is a prosecutable crime. If Democrats can prove Bondi lied in testimony, they can refer her for criminal prosecution. That threat gives Congress significant leverage over Bondi and creates pressure for her to either start cooperating or to face potential legal consequences. The bipartisan nature of the criticism in the hearing is noteworthy. When both Democratic and Republican senators are asking tough questions, it suggests the concerns aren't purely partisan. Republicans are typically reluctant to criticize Trump appointees or to challenge executive branch officials from their own party. But if even Republicans are uncomfortable with what they're hearing about midnight calls and sealed files, that indicates the evidence is strong enough to overcome partisan loyalty. That's bad for Bondi because it means she can't dismiss criticism as purely political attacks. When your own party is questioning your conduct, you have a real credibility problem. Bondi's combative and defensive responses throughout the hearing made her look guilty even if she isn't. When officials are accused of wrongdoing, their demeanor matters. If you respond to questions calmly and provide clear, substantive answers, you look like someone with nothing to hide. But if you get angry, attack your questioners, claim persecution, and give evasive answers, you look like someone who's cornered and doesn't have good explanations for your conduct. Bondi's behavior fell into the latter category. She didn't project innocence or transparency. She projected defensiveness and hostility. That's exactly the wrong tone to take when you're trying to maintain credibility as an impartial law enforcement official. The comparison to previous attorneys general is instructive. Traditionally, AGs maintain independence from the White House on specific cases and investigations. They avoid even the appearance of political influence over prosecutorial decisions. They're very careful about communications with the president precisely to maintain credibility as independent law enforcers rather than political operatives. Bondi's conduct, if Schumer's evidence is accurate, represents a departure from those norms. Having midnight calls with Trump about matters related to investigations suggests a level of political coordination that previous AGs would have avoided precisely because it compromises DOJ independence. That departure from norms is what makes this so serious. The impact on ongoing investigations and prosecutions is significant. If DOJ under Bondi has been politically compromised, then every prosecutorial decision DOJ has made becomes suspect. Where charges brought or not brought for legitimate legal reasons or for political reasons, where investigations pursued aggressively or half-heartedly based on political considerations. These questions undermine public confidence in the justice system. When people believe law enforcement is politicized, they lose faith that justice is being applied fairly, and that erosion of trust has long-term consequences for democratic legitimacy and for the rule of law. The precedent being set by Schumer's aggressive oversight is important for future relations between Congress and DOJ. If Schumer succeeds in forcing disclosure of information that DOJ wanted to keep secret, it establishes that congressional oversight authority is real and enforceable even when the executive branch resists. That could embolden future Congresses to be more aggressive in demanding information and holding cabinet officials accountable. But it could also lead to increased conflict between branches as executive officials dig in and refuse to cooperate with what they see as political harassment. The balance between legitimate oversight and branch conflict is delicate, and Schumer's actions are testing where that balance should be. Okay, so let's break down what happens next and what these revelations mean for Bondi, for DOJ, and for the broader questions about accountability and transparency, because this hearing has created momentum that's going to drive events in the coming weeks and months. First and most immediately, Bondi faces serious decisions about how to respond. Does she try to stonewall Congress and continue refusing to release documents, knowing that could result in contempt charges and further political damage? Does she cooperate and start releasing information, knowing that could implicate Trump and other powerful people? Does she resign rather than continuing to face hostile oversight and potential criminal referrals for perjury? None of these options are good for her personally or politically. Stonewalling makes her look guilty and creates legal jeopardy. Cooperating betrays Trump and makes her a target of MAGA fury. Resigning looks like an admission of guilt and ends her political career. She's trapped with no obvious escape route. The Epstein files are probably going to come out one way or another. Once Congress has formally demanded them and has the political momentum from this hearing, it becomes very difficult for DOJ to continue withholding them. Bondi might try to delay or to release them with redactions, but the core information is probably going to become public. When that happens, we'll find out what's been hidden and why. If the files contain explosive information about powerful people connected to Trump, it will explain why there was such resistance to disclosure. If they're relatively mundane, it will raise questions about why there was so much resistance. Either way, disclosure is coming, and it will be a major news event. For Trump personally, the evidence of midnight calls to Bondi creates new legal problems. If prosecutors can show Trump was inappropriately influencing DOJ investigations or decisions, that's potential obstruction of justice. Trump is already facing multiple criminal investigations and prosecutions. Evidence that he was using his appointees to interfere with law enforcement adds to his legal jeopardy. It also undermines any claims Trump makes that investigations of him are politically motivated. If he was actively trying to corrupt DOJ, then investigations of him are justified law enforcement rather than political persecution. Congressional Republicans face difficult choices about whether to defend Bondi or acknowledge problems with her conduct. Party loyalty pushes them toward defense. But the evidence Schumer presented makes defense politically difficult, especially for Republicans in competitive districts who can't afford to look like they're covering up corruption. We'll probably see Republicans split, where some continue defending Bondi while others distance themselves or even criticize her conduct. That split will create visible divisions within the party and will feed narratives about Republican dysfunction. The independence of the Justice Department is now a major political issue heading into 2026 elections. Democrats will campaign on promises to restore DOJ independence and to hold officials accountable for political corruption. They'll point to Bondi's conduct as evidence that Trump and his appointees can't be trusted with law enforcement power. Republicans will have to either defend DOJ's current operation or join in criticism, neither of which is politically comfortable. The issue resonates with voters because everyone has an interest in believing law enforcement is fair and non-political. The procedural precedent Schumer is setting about forcing disclosure could be significant for future oversight. If he succeeds in compelling DOJ to release documents over objections, it establishes that congressional oversight powers are real and that executive branch claims of privilege or confidentiality can be overcome when Congress presses hard enough. Future committee chairs and congressional leaders might follow Schumer's playbook when dealing with resistant executive branch officials. That could lead to more aggressive oversight generally, which would be healthy for accountability, but might also increase conflict between branches. Bondi's potential criminal liability for misleading Congress creates enormous pressure on her to either cooperate fully going forward or to lawyer up and prepare for possible prosecution. If Democrats believe they can prove perjury, they might refer the matter to DOJ for prosecution. But DOJ investigating its own boss creates obvious conflicts of interest. That might lead to appointment of a special counsel or to pressure for Bondi to resign so someone else can handle the investigation. These procedural complications could drag out for months while Bondi's legal status remains uncertain. The impact on other Trump appointees and allies is significant. If Bondi gets held accountable for inappropriate conduct, others who have engaged in similar behavior will worry they might be next. That creates incentives for people to distance themselves from Trump or to start cooperating with investigators to protect themselves. We could see a cascade where accountability for one official leads to revelations about others, which leads to more accountability. That's exactly the kind of cascade that Trump wants to avoid, but that oversight pressure can trigger. For the American public, these revelations reinforce or challenge existing beliefs depending on political orientation. Trump critics see vindication, proof that Trump corrupted DOJ and used it for political purposes. Trump supporters see persecution, another example of Democrats attacking Trump allies unfairly. But persuadable voters in the middle might be moved by evidence of midnight calls and hidden files in ways that pure political rhetoric wouldn't move them. The key is whether the evidence is strong enough and clear enough to overcome partisan polarization. Schumer's presentation of actual call records rather than just allegations might be effective in reaching those persuadable voters. The long-term damage to institutional norms and to DOJ's reputation will take years to repair, regardless of how this specific situation resolves. Once DOJ is perceived as politicized, that perception is hard to overcome. Future attorneys general will have to work to demonstrate independence and to restore public confidence. That might mean being extra careful about White House communications, being especially transparent about decision-making processes, and bending over backward to avoid any appearance of political influence. The restoration of DOJ's reputation as an independent law enforcement agency should be a priority for whoever holds the position after Bondi. Here's the bottom line. After examining all the angles, Chuck Schumer confronted Attorney General Pam Bondi with evidence of suspicious midnight calls to Trump and with demands for sealed Epstein files, creating a dramatic Senate hearing where Bondi appeared cornered and defensive. The evidence of late-night communications at key moments in investigations raises serious questions about DOJ independence and about whether Bondi has been taking political direction from Trump rather than making independent law enforcement decisions. Bondi's refusal to commit to releasing Epstein files and her evasive answers about the calls made her look like someone hiding wrongdoing. The bipartisan nature of questioning suggests concerns aren't purely partisan. Bondi faces terrible choices about whether to continue stonewalling, to cooperate, or to resign. The Epstein files are likely to be released, creating new revelations. Trump faces additional legal jeopardy from evidence he was inappropriately influencing DOJ, and broader questions about DOJ independence and accountability are now central political issues. What happens next depends on whether Bondi can provide better explanations for her conduct or whether the evidence of impropriety continues to mount. But this hearing has created momentum for accountability that will be hard to stop.